What is up, guys? Welcome to the Joey G Show, the first episode of the Joey G Show. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, comment down below what you thought about this podcast, and check out any future podcasts or clips that I make. And today we are discussing one of the biggest stories in pro wrestling in the past few years. Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, has died at the age of 71. He died earlier this week on Thursday, early in the morning in Florida. And this is definitely like I planned to make this to start this podcast last week. And it didn't end up happening. So I was like, okay, I'll do it next week, whatever. And then Hogan died, and that meant that the first story I ever talk about, the first thing I ever talk about on this podcast, is the death of one of the most important people in pro wrestling history. So we're starting off hot here, folks. Definitely a big start to this podcast. But yeah, Hulk Hogan died, and it has been a crazy couple days. And not just the wrestling world, because again, I'll get to this later. He transcended wrestling. It has been crazy for anyone who knew the name Hulk Hogan, for anyone who remembered what he did and lived through Hulkamania. It has been a crazy few days. I have seen people mourning his death, countless people mourning his death, all the people in the wrestling world, WWE themselves paying tribute on SmackDown. I've seen, people on TikTok, crying over Hulk Hogan, just random people crying over Hogan's death. I've seen, candlelight vigils of people, lighting up candles for Hulk Hogan. And then I've seen people, dancing, laughing, posting memes about it, celebrating the death of Hulk Hogan, which is interesting. It's very interesting to see how polarizing he truly was. And you don't usually see this when someone, that famous dies. It's usually, regardless if they have a lot of hate, it's usually people giving their respects. But I have seen the opposite for a good part. Like 50% of fans hate this guy and are happy to see him dead, and 50% love him and are heartbroken to see their childhood hero die. So we're gonna get right into that today and other stuff and more. So Hulk Hogan, where do we even start to talk about this guy? It's unbelievable how polarizing and how big of a star he was. I guess we'll start from the start. Hogan, here's how I'll start this. Hogan was the most important person in pro wrestling history. You could say The Rock, you could say Vince McMahon, you could say John Cena, you could say Austin, you could say Roman Reigns, you could say Cody Rhodes if you really want to, you could say Bruno Sammartino. None of them were as important to pro wrestling than Hulk Hogan. And I don't think that's crazy to say. I don't think that's a hot take. I don't think that it's wrong for me to say that. I fully believe those words I just said. Hulk Hogan is the most important person in pro wrestling history. Without him, and I know a lot of people have been saying this, but it bears repeating because of just how big he was. Without him, wrestling would not even be as close as to what it is today. It might not exist. I'll put that. I know that's extreme, but I believe that his rise in the '80s and what that meant for the WWF was integral. He Hulkamania was a real thing. Now I wasn't alive. I don't know about this, man. I was born well after Hulkamania was a thing, right? I could still sit here and recognize how important he was. He was everywhere, man. He was everywhere. Everyone knew who Hulk Hogan was. To this day, if I walk down the street and I ask some random guy, right, who's above the age of 30, right? Let's say 30, right? A guy or a woman, anyone over the age of 30 who isn't into wrestling, if I ask them, hey, name a wrestler, the first wrestler they'll say is Hulk Hogan, without a doubt. He was wrestling. He was wrestling. My dad grew up during that time. He was a Hulkamaniac. All his friends were. Everyone loved and knew Hulk Hogan. Everyone. He was one of the most famous people on the planet. You don't get that anymore in wrestling. The closest is The Rock. And yes, he was famous as a wrestler, but he really got famous as an actor. You know, same for John Cena, really. He was famous as a wrestler, definitely beloved, definitely made big misses. I'm not diminishing that, but he became bigger once he became an actor. Hulk Hogan was a wrestler, a very famous wrestler, in fact. One of the most famous wrestler of all time, hands down. And you need to recognize that. Like you can sit here and dislike the guy all you want, and God knows I don't like the guy, right? I do have a picture on my wall, so that might be some hypocritical, but I don't like the guy. Plain and simple, right? But you can't you have to recognize what he did. You have to. It would be stupid to say that he didn't make the wrestling business better. Made the wrestling business worse in some ways, but overall, Hulk Hogan did more good for the wrestling business than bad. He did more good for the wrestling business than bad, hands down. The '80s when he pinned the Iron Sheik and started Hulkamania, won the title at Madison Square Garden, and really started Hulkamania to WrestleMania 1, where he's teaming up with Mr. T, who was one of the biggest celebrities at the time, against Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. Sorry, I forgot. And, just the amount of business that made. If that show failed, wrestling would not be what it is today. Hogan was a big part in making that biggest wrestling show in the history of wrestling to that point. Fast forward to WrestleMania 3, because WrestleMania 2 doesn't really matter. It happened on a Monday, by the way, which is pretty weird. But anyway, WrestleMania 3, where he slammed Andre the Giant, you know, the first to ever slam Andre, but they didn't know that. Yeah, they didn't know that. They thought, oh my God, this 500-pound guy, or 700 if you believe what Hogan says, this 500-pound guy, he's not going to get slammed, right? There's no way he loses. And Hogan slams him and drops the leg drop and pins him. That was magic. It was magic. He was everyone's hero. Everyone loved Hogan. Everyone. Everyone knew who Hulk Hogan was, and everyone loved who Hulk Hogan was. It was it was it was impossible to ignore him. He was everywhere. Everywhere. You ask anyone who was alive during that time. Again, I was not, so I did not experience this. This is just what I've been told. But you ask anyone from that time who you don't have to be a wrestling fan. You ask anyone from that time, how big was Hulk Hogan? Where was Hulk Hogan? They'd say he was everywhere. It was impossible to ignore him. It was impossible to not be a Hulkamaniac. You didn't have to watch wrestling every Saturday on Saturday night's main event. You didn't have to know who, all the other wrestlers were. You didn't have to know who Macho Man was, or Ultimate Warrior, or Andre the Giant. You didn't have to know who they were, but you knew who Hulk Hogan was. You knew who Hulk Hogan was, plain and simple. If you were alive in the '80s, at any age, you knew who Hulk Hogan was. Your kid had the action figure. If you were a kid, you were asking your parents for Christmas to get the Hulk Hogan workout set, which my dad still has in the garage to this day. It's a workout set. It's ridiculous. Have you seen that thing? Look it up. It's literally video. It's an audio tape of Hogan telling you to work out, and it's fucking hilarious. But everyone had stuff like that. Everyone had the video games with him in. Everyone had posters of Hulk Hogan on their wall. He was everyone's favorite. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen nowadays, and I don't think it ever will again. It's not going to happen where every single person knows who Roman Reigns is. A good majority of people do, right? But a lot of people don't. And I'm talking about just wrestling, right? Just wrestling. Cena, known as an actor. Dwayne Johnson, he's not known as The Rock, he's known as Dwayne Johnson, right? They're actors. They became actors. They became larger than life through acting. Hulk Hogan became larger than life through wrestling. And yes, he tried acting, and besides Rocky 3, it didn't really work. And I'm pretty sure he was in Rocky 3 before he was in WWF, actually. I could be wrong about that. I think he was still in the AWA when he performed in Rocky 3. He wasn't as big as he would become. Sorry, out of breath. Hogan Hogan was everywhere. Hogan was wrestling, and you can't deny that. And then you fast forward to the 90s. He jumps to WCW, and at first it didn't really work. Hulkamania was not as strong as it was in the 80s, and that happens, right? But then he turns heel. And it's the first time someone of that caliber turned heel. A guy like the main guy, the main babyface in your company turns heel, right? It was huge. It was insane to see Hulk Hogan turn into a bad guy. The NWO forms, and it becomes another boom period. Hogan caused two boom periods in professional wrestling. Yes, the NWO got bloated. Yes, it didn't end well, right? But Hogan made major business. He sold a lot of tickets. He made a lot of money for him and his company two times. And then WCW closes, right? There's a whole Bash to the Beach fiasco with Vince Russo, which I'm not going to get into because it's been rehashed a million times. But Hogan leaves WCW and WCW folds. WWE picks up the NWO. Hogan comes in as a heel again. He wrestles The Rock in WrestleMania, and the crowd turned him babyface. The crowd couldn't get enough of Hogan because nostalgia is a hell of a drug, right? Hogan is the blueprint for nostalgia. That seeing him, the Toronto crowd saw him that night and were out of their mind. They didn't want to boo. They didn't want to boo Hogan. They couldn't boo Hogan. They loved him that much. Hogan hooks up. He turns babyface in the middle of the match, loses, puts over the Rock, but Hulkamania was reborn again. And then Hogan comes back later and wins the WWE title one more time and has a couple more matches after that against Vince, against Randy, and leaves for TNA, which is a whole thing. And but that's really the end of Hulkamania in WWE, right? He gets old, he starts at TNA, and it's whatever in TNA. But Hogan and Hulkamania was huge. It was insanely important to pro wrestling. And that is what people are mourning, right? People are mourning that nostalgia, that Hulk Hogan nostalgia, that Hulkamania running through their veins, right? That say your prayers, take your vitamins. That's what they're mourning, and I understand that. And then you have the other people who don't mourn that, don't have that nostalgia. Either we're there and don't care, still seems a horrible person, or weren't even born yet during Hulkamania and just know Hulk Hogan as a racist and a liar, a bigot. And that's unfortunately for him what his legacy has become, right? 10 years ago, when that thing came out, when the racism, the sex tape of him saying some disgusting, deplorable shit, right? That shouldn't ever be repeated. When that came out, his legacy died. Hulk Hogan didn't die on Thursday. Hulk Hogan died in 2015. Terry Bollea died on Thursday. But that myth, that, you know, nostalgia for Hulk Hogan, the Hulk Hogan that everyone knew, right? That died in 2015. Yes, wrestling fans knew he was a bad person by then. Wrestling fans knew about his backstage politics, about his creative control, about how he stopped the Wrestlers Union. Hardcore wrestling fans already didn't really like Hulk Hogan. But when they went to the arenas and his music hit, they'd still chant for him, right? WrestleMania 30, he's out there and he's getting, cheered out of the building, right? Or cheered into the building. I don't know, whatever that saying would be. But they knew he was a piece of shit by that point, right? But they didn't know he was a racist, right? And that's crossing the line for a lot of people, as it should, right? And when that came out, the casuals, the people that had not watched wrestling in years, they found out who he really was, a racist. That's what he was. right? There's no denying that. And I'll say this again: the best. It's in the title of what I'm going to make this clip, but the best thing Hulk Hogan could have done for his legacy was die 10 years ago, hands down. That is the best thing he could have done for his legacy. I'm not saying I want him to. I wished he died 10 years ago. I'm saying the best thing he could have done was die before any of that racist shit came out. If he had done that, the myth of Hulk Hogan would still be alive today. I am not a Hulkamaniac. I was not alive during the 80s, right? Not even the 90s, right? Barely in the 2000s, right? I remember I remember watching some of the Hogan stuff when I first got into wrestling at 5 years old, and my dad showing me, what Hulkamania is. I remember that, but I never saw him live, right? I never wasn't there when he dropped the leg on Andre, or when he slammed him, or when he beat the Iron Sheik. I wasn't there, so and that's a lot for a lot of people. So we don't have this connection to the myth of Hulk Hogan. So when we hear the real shit he did, it's really shitty. We're not going to give him any excuses. We're not going to give him leeway. We're not going to say, "Oh yeah, but he's my hero." He wasn't anyone's hero. He was not anyone in Gen Z's hero. Certainly, barely any millennials' heroes, right? I guess millennials, yeah, like millennials' heroes, but not Gen Z. Certainly not Gen A, right? My little brother barely. He knows who Hulk Hogan is. He's a wrestling fan, but he's not a Hulkamaniac, right? He's 11 years old, and I'm pretty sure he knows more of the racist stuff, right? And I don't feel bad. Like, I don't feel bad for Hogan. If you if you say and do shitty things when you live, people won't miss you when you die. Plain and simple. If you want the overwhelming majority of people to miss you when you die, don't do shitty things. Everyone makes mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. Everyone watching this has made a lot of mistakes. Everyone here has done a shitty thing. But when barely anyone has a positive thing to say about you, you should expect them to not miss you when you die. It's plain and simple. It's the hard, cold truth. And I think this is a reminder to people to try to be better. Don't say the N word hard R on a sex tape. When you're having sex with your friend's wife, don't have sex with your friend's wife, right? Don't don't take steroids and lie about it, right? Don't be a backstage politician where you hold people down. Don't stop unions, right? I know this doesn't apply to a lot of people, but don't do shit like that. And you won't, no one will be celebrating your death. Now, do I think it's wrong for when he died to jump up and say, "Oh my God, let's go," and fucking, throw a fucking party or a parade? Yeah, that's wrong. That's wrong to say about Hogan. It is. I don't like there's a couple people on this. I'm not gonna say who, but there's a couple people on this world that I would celebrate if they die. And Hulk Hogan's not one of them. And he was never going to be. Is he a shitty person? Yes. But when I saw the notification that he had died, I didn't say, "Oh my God, let's go." I didn't say, "Oh man." I just went, "Oh, wow." Just apathy, honestly. Right? Because he wasn't this mythical figure to me. He wasn't, you know, Hulk Hogan, the Hulk maniac, the take your paracetamol vitamins. He wasn't that. He was an asshole to me, plain and simple, right? I don't want to get political on my first episode of a podcast, but I also don't like, the things he supported in, late last year during the election, right? And I can overlook stuff like that. And when I'm talking about the stuff he did, that was the positive stuff he did, because he did a lot of positive shit. Bad people do good things, right? He made a lot of money. He made a lot of money for his company. He made pro wrestling what it is today. But he also held a lot of people down. He also said a lot of horrible shit. He also did a lot of horrible shit, right? And that's not worth celebrating. That ruined his legacy. He should have died 10 years ago to save his legacy. If he would have died in 2013, 2014, before the sex tape came out, everyone would love him. And the myth of Hulk Hogan would still be alive. Hulkamania would still be alive. But Hulkamania died 10 years ago. Hulkamania died before Terry Bollea did. Hulkamania died in 2015. Terry Bollea died on Thursday. And it could have been different. It could have been different. But Hogan chose to do horrible things in his life. And I'll say it again. If you do shitty things when you're alive, don't expect people to miss you when you're dead. Okay, now to some lighter stuff that isn't about death. Um, WWE Speed uh, has been canceled. The show that I thought was doomed to fail from the time they announced it has been canceled, or at least it looks like it has been. There hasn't really been a statement put out by WWE, and I think the reason for that is that there's a lot of apathy. I don't think people really care about WWE Speed. I think it was a dumb idea to start with. I mean, 5 minute matches on Twitter, on their Twitter account, nothing like special. No storylines, just a tournament. It was doomed to fail from this beginning. And I think they did it clearly to just get some people some in ring time, to work on themselves so they're not really getting booked for TV, and also for a lot of money. And I think it's funny because if you go on Twitter, which I don't even have, but I've heard this. If you go on Twitter, there's like 5 people asking about WWE Speed because it was just not popular. It was not a popular thing. Like it was fun. I'll say this. When I went to SmackDown late last year, they had WWE Speed, and it was one of the first ones they did. They had it on before SmackDown, and it was pretty entertaining because the clock. It was kind of fun to watch when you're in the arena, right? But I only saw it one time. Like to watch that every week, it's like the same match every time, right? Like 5 minutes, really? Like that's not enough. I mean, it could be, but that's not really enough to tell a story, right? In 5 minutes, and I don't know, man. The fact that they never like the champions never brought their titles on TV either, uh, you know, was stupid. I can't even name the male champion. I know Sol Ruka is the women's speed champion. I can't off the top. I don't know who the fuck the men's is. Andrade, Dragon Lee. Let me know in the comments what it was. But oh my god, like what a complete and utter failure from them. I think if they wanted to do something like that, get rid of the time limit, right? You can have a Twitter exclusive show or something like that. Just make it worth someone's time to watch. Maybe I don't know, have a like something like the mixed match challenge when they put that on Facebook, right? That was on Facebook Live. That was pretty fun. Having mixed tag matches in a tournament that was pretty cool. But speed 5 minute matches for forever, like just in the storylines is just a tournament every month. Lame, honestly lame. And I'm not gonna miss it. I don't think a lot of people are either. If you were enjoying this episode of the Joey G Show, make sure to hit a subscribe and like the video and tell us what you like about it in the comments down below. Now let's get back to the podcast. Alberto Del Rio is gone from AAA. This past week, he had a match where the stipulation was loser leaves town, and it seems like he is done with AAA for the most part. And I am not surprised at all. My face is not shocked. My jaw's not on the floor. I expected this. I think everyone else did. The fact that WWE bought AAA, you see the writing on the wall. How they took the title off him and they had Vikingo face Chad Gable instead of him, and they haven't really mentioned Del Rio. But another thing, though, I don't know if this was picked up by a lot of people, but they did say his name on commentary this past episode of Raw in the match with Sheamus and Rusev. They were talking about the League of Nations, and Michael Cole mentioned Del Rio by name, and I think it slipped through a lot of people. Like people didn't really realize that that's the first time they mentioned him in quite a long time. And that begs the question: is he leaving Triple H to go to WWE? Like, how crazy would that be if he actually comes back to WWE. I hope to God not. Have we forgot what this guy allegedly did? Right? Let's not even talk about the kidnapping thing, right? Let's talk about the allegations with Paige and how he treated her and all of the bullshit that he has said in the past and done and the allegations. Let's talk about the kidnapping actually, where he I don't remember all the details or all the gruesome details on the top of my head where he kidnapped this woman that he was dating and made her dance for him, right? And beat her for hours. And yes, the charges were dropped, right? But like something like that is so specific. And when someone has a history of being problematic and allegations like that come up, it's hard not to believe them, right? I still believe that he probably did what he was accused of, right? Charges were dropped, but that doesn't always mean that nothing happened, right? He is not a good person, and it's been stated by a lot of people that he's not a good person. He's always in controversies. He fought a fan earlier this year, right? Do you really want to bring someone that problematic onto a global television show or a show on the biggest streaming platform in the world? Do you really want to do that, right? If you want to get him involved with the Sheamus and Rusev thing, who gives a fuck about the League of Nations? Move on. Yeah, I've been liking the Rusev Sheamus matches. They'll probably be a tag team. That's what I think is leading to. But they weren't even a big faction. They were there for a couple months to job to Roman Reigns. Who cares about that? I hope they don't bring it back. I hope to God they don't. It might. I think it's just WWE. It's the opposite. WWE just don't want anything to do with him. Even if they, aren't having him on their show, they still don't want him on AAA. They own it. So I hope it's that they just want to get rid of this guy, and it's not that he's leaving AAA so he can join WWE because that would be so dumb. It really reminds me of Tessa Blanchard going to TNA, which by the way, I was at Slammiversary, which was a great show. But Tessa Blanchard got booed out the building, and there were "She's a racist" chants, and I'm happy to say that I helped start those. So that was fun, with everyone chanting "She's a racist," which in a horrible match with Indy Hartwell. Absolutely horrible match. Not Indy's fault because I like Indy Hartwell, but Tessa just problematic too. Like you got to keep these people away from this shit, man. I don't see any reason for bringing Alberta back.